Okay, well, welcome back. I hope everybody enjoyed their break. I just wanted to give one quick programming update before we move into our next presentation. Unfortunately, Valerie Moritz from the DEA is unable to join us this afternoon, but we do have a substitute presentation, so we are lucky to have, for our last session of the day today, Dr. Anita Jacobson will be presenting strategies for combating opioid-related breathing emergencies, the Community First Responder Program. And that also will have the 1.5 contact hours for CE for law. So just wanted to provide that update. And next, I am pleased to move us into our next session. Let's clear the air. Vaping is not the alternative. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jamie McConaha. Jamie is joining us virtually, so I will be advancing her slides for her here, but you all will be able to see Jamie in the slides. Dr. McConaha is an associate professor of pharmacy practice at Duquesne University School of Pharmacy in the Division of Pharmacy Practice. After graduating from Duquesne, she completed a 2-year academic and teaching fellowship with the school. Upon completion of her fellowship, Dr. McConaha joined the School of Pharmacy's clinical faculty. Her teaching and research interests focus on the role of the pharmacist in ambulatory care, specifically with the disease states of diabetes, COPD, and tobacco cessation. In 2013, Dr. McConaha developed and implemented the Duquesne University Tobacco Treatment Specialist, or TTS, training and certificate course. Since its inception, the course has graduated over 1,000 TTSs from across the country. And most recently, this course has been incorporated into the required pharmacy curriculum for the school. Dr. McConaha practices in the field of ambulatory care, and for the past 10 years, she has worked as an embedded pharmacist within 2 primary care physician practices. In this setting, Dr. McConaha offers a variety of clinical services for her patients, including medication therapy management appointments, transition of care consults, and group tobacco cessation classes. Dr. McConaha developed and teaches a group smoking cessation class to patients of her practice and also throughout the greater Pittsburgh community. She has published on topics of electronic nicotine delivery systems and has spoken on this topic at the local and national level. Additionally, Dr. McConaha serves on the board of directors for Tobacco Free Allegheny and was recently elected to the office of Secretary of the Association for the Treatment of Tobacco Use and Dependence. With that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jamie McConaha.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Happy Friday the 13th. I am so sorry that I can't be there with you live. Unfortunately, we had a last-minute travel restriction from my university, so I was not able to come out to Rhode Island. I was very disappointed, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to still get to speak with you today. So the presentation, as you heard, is called Let's Clear the Air. Vaping is not the alternative. You could advance the slide. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. And my learning objectives are listed here. So the first 2 learning objectives, we're really going to talk about ENDS. So ENDS is the abbreviation for Electronic Nicotine Delivery System. So we're going to talk about what makes up these products, and then we're going to spend some time talking about the changes in the regulations surrounding ENDS. And then lastly, I hope to discuss a little bit about our role as healthcare practitioners in providing education and recommendation to these patients who may be using these products or trying to quit their use. This slide. So we will start with a fun question here. What year did the FDA last approve a new smoking cessation medication? Okay, I see some couple of responses coming through. 06, 08, 2002, 97, 2006 again. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and advance the slide and see the answer to this one. So the answer is 2006, and that was Chantix or varenicline. So the question remains, is it time for something new? And I think that when the e-cigarettes and these ENDS products came to the market, a lot of people thought these could be the new solution or our new product that was used for smoking cessation. But as you can probably tell, spoiler alert from my title of this presentation, they are not. And we're going to talk about why that is. So I wanted to begin with some basic terminology. So as I mentioned, ENDS stands for Electronic Nicotine Delivery System. And that is an umbrella term that really encompasses any of these electronic products. So you can see some examples listed on the slide. That's going to be your e-cigarette, Cigalikes, vape pens, hookahs, or e-hookahs, excuse me, etc. When someone uses an e-cigarette, we call that vaping, or the person using it is called a vapor. The solution or the cartridge of solution that goes into these products that can contain nicotine or not is referred to by several names such as e-juice, e-liquid, vape juice, etc. And then the last row there that says mods is a particular type of ENDS products. It's short for modification, and they're larger electronic devices. And I'll be showing you some pictures of those coming up. So just as a background, before we begin speaking about our e-cigarettes, to compare them to traditional cigarettes, I have the components of a traditional smoked cigarette on the slide here. So you can see in the middle that traditional cigarettes are filled with mostly tobacco leaves. Those tobacco leaves are a reconstituted product treated with nicotine and up to 600 different additives. We always get the question of, why are all these additives in a cigarette? A lot of them we don't know, but some of the reason has to do with absorption of the nicotine and also flavorings. You'll also see, if you look at that picture on the left-hand side, that there's a paper wrapped around those tobacco leaves, and it's made up of two different thicknesses of paper. And as the cigarette burns, we get what's called a burn ring. And the reason for these is to control the rate of burning of the tobacco and also to keep the cigarette lit when the user is not actively puffing on it. You'll also notice at the tip of the cigarette are ventilation holes. So these were originally designed to allow additional air into the cigarette, with the thinking that this would lower the tar and the nicotine that was given to the user. But what we find is most smokers cover those ventilation holes with their fingers, so it really doesn't do anything in terms of a risk reduction. And then lastly, a filter was added to cigarettes, and that was added in 1954, really as a way to, again, make it a healthier or safer form of smoking. Again, we know that there's really no evidence that decreased our risk of smoking. Slide. So our first true question here, which of the following is true regarding e-cigarettes? Is it A, in the US, the nicotine components of e-cigarettes are highly monitored and kept to an acceptable range? B, electronic cigarette companies are required to label their products with accurate nicotine concentrations? C, newer generation e-cigarettes use nicotine salts to be able to deliver higher concentrations of nicotine than first generation e-cigarettes? Or D, vaping has been suggested as a preferred smoking cessation method in adults over the age of 18. I'll give it a second for some answers to come in. And it looks like the majority of responders are answering answer C, which is the correct answer. I realize the way that D is worded, it says vaping has been suggested as a preferred smoking cessation method, and maybe that's true from the manufacturers of e-cigarettes, but it's definitely, as you know, not an FDA-approved cessation method and nothing that any of the health organizations recommend. So yes, C is our correct answer here. So I introduced here a case study, and we'll revisit this after we get through the talk. A patient of yours has struggled with smoking cessation for 5 years. She typically smokes a pack per day, and she's tried every available nicotine replacement therapy with no success. She presents to your clinic excited about her new e-cigarette, which has helped her cut back to 5 to 7 cigarettes per day. She asks for your opinion on e-cigarette use. So this is a case, a real life case, and I present this when we teach it to our students at Duquesne, that we see a lot of times. So again, when e-cigarettes first came to the market, a lot of adult smokers thought that these would be a great smoking cessation aid. And in that regard, well, again, we're going to talk about all the harm of these, but is it safer than cigarettes? That's what we're going to talk about. But I really think the issue becomes that we're seeing younger, high school and middle school age students use these devices who are not previously smokers. And are they really acting as a gateway to smoking? So again, we'll come back to this and see if the talk changes any of your opinions on how you might respond to this patient. So just to give a brief history of e-cigarettes, you can see actually a person from Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, first filed a patent for an electronic smoking device in 1963. So if you are familiar with any of the U.S. Surgeon General reports or anything like that, it wasn't until 1964 that we had the first U.S. Surgeon General report that really said smoking was bad for your health. So this Herbert Gilbert was really before his time. Unfortunately, his patent for this electronic smoking device never really took off. He was a little bit too early. People weren't interested at that time in an e-cigarette. In 2003, however, we had Han Leek, who was a 52-year-old pharmacist in China, develop the first e-cigarette. And what was interesting was this pharmacist, his father was a heavy smoker who developed lung cancer. And so this pharmacist developed the e-cigarette as a healthier alternative to smoking. So originally it was developed with good intentions to help as a smoking cessation aid. So in 2006, we saw e-cigarettes become available in Europe. And then in 2007, they started making their way to the United States. Slide. So as you will see on the upcoming slides, these products vary widely. And I'm going to go through the different generations of e-cigarettes. But in general, they have a similar anatomy that is shown here on the slide. So the majority of the e-cigarette is made up with the battery. Most of these products today are rechargeable, although there are disposable ones on the market as well. Next to the battery, there is going to be that microprocessor, and there's an atomizer. The atomizer contains a heating element, usually a metal coil, that heats the liquid component in that cartridge. It turns then that liquid component into a vapor, which is what then the user breathes in. So again, we're going to look at some of the different generations, but this is just the overall anatomy of what these products contain. So our first generation electronic cigarette, when they first entered the market, they were intended to look like a traditional cigarette, as you can tell from these pictures. We also call these first generations ciga-likes. Oftentimes they are disposable, just like a traditional cigarette, although there are some ciga-likes that are rechargeable as well. And some examples that come to mind would be like the blue e-cigarette, which is a rechargeable ciga-like. Slide. As e-cigarettes got more popular, their design evolved and they got further away from the traditional look and feel of a traditional cigarette. And we started to see these larger pen-shaped devices. And these larger e-cigarettes were rechargeable. And because of that rechargeable component, they became more convenient for the user. So our third generation e-cigarettes, these are what I was referring to earlier as a mod. So again, mod just means short for modification. A lot of times you'll see users that use mods be the hobbyists, as we like to call them. So they, it's a hobby, really. They get very into customizing these products, making them their own designs, things like that. I've even seen mods that were an old Nintendo game controller that turned into an e-cigarette. And I'll show you some other pictures coming up. So these, as you can tell, are much larger. They do have a rechargeable battery. And when we saw this third generation come on the market, they became refillable with the e-liquids. And so this is where we really saw the flavoring of these products begin to take off. And that's something that we're going to talk a lot more about when we get into some of the newer regulations and how that's changed with flavorings. And then lastly, our current or newest generation of e-cigarettes is our 4th generation. And the switch here has really been to sort of a high tech or a sleek appearance. Again, these are easily rechargeable. Usually they connect to a USB cord. And they contain most of the time a disposable pod, which is shown in that picture at the top, that's filled with the e-liquid. I have some examples listed on the slide. Juul really dominates the market. It's over 3/4 of the market of e-cigarettes right now. But some other examples are Sorion Drop, My Blue, and Vuse Alto. So this is, even though these kind of look like mods, these are some examples of 4th generation e-cigarettes. It constantly amazes me. So this is obviously a huge area of my research and teaching, and something I'm very passionate about is smoking cessation and studying the effects of these e-cigarettes. And I'm constantly amazed by the new design and appearances I see on the market. It seems like there's always a new one every day, and it's really hard to keep up. But going from the slide left to right, the one on the left that has those 4 standing together, that's the Sorion Air product. The one next to that, the blue one, is Sorion Drop. Next to that, you can see is actually a vape watch, which is something pretty interesting. So you can have students in classrooms really have that pod like right on their watch that they can vape from. And then the one at the top next to the Lamborghini symbol is called a Rolo Badget. So as I mentioned, smoking cessation, smoking, and e-cigs are constantly evolving. And what was just approved at the end of 2019 is something called IQOS. And that stands for I Quit Ordinary Smoking. They also call this a heat not burn system. So they say that what you're doing is a tobacco heating system. This is brand new. It's not available in all states. Right now, it's only available in 2 US states, but I suspect this will be something we see everywhere very quickly. And the concept behind this, again, this is from the tobacco industry. I always say sort of like the evil tobacco industry, but they say that this product heats, as it says, and doesn't burn your tobacco. So they say traditional cigarettes burn at about 600 degrees Celsius. This product heats the tobacco only to about 350 degrees Celsius. And they claim, therefore, that it's smoke-free and that the user is not inhaling any smoke or ash. So again, this is being marketed as a healthier form of smoking. And really, this resembles what we have seen, among history with the tobacco industry constantly trying to modify their products and come out with safer alternatives. So it goes back to, adding the filters in 1954, coming out with light cigarettes, low tar cigarettes, then the e-cigarettes, and now this is the newest thing coming to market, this IQOS. So are these heated tobacco products, including e-cigarettes and that IQOS that I just showed you, are they less harmful than regular cigarettes? Hopefully, again, from the title of my talk, you can guess that the answer is no. And I have on this slide some of the rationale. So the first box there on the left says that although the aerosol that we get from these e-cigarettes does generally have lower levels of harmful ingredients, it doesn't mean that they're safe. So when I have patients that come to me and they ask about these e-cigarettes, particularly I work mostly with adult smokers. So these are patients using these as a smoking cessation device. I tell them, puff for puff, these products probably are better than smoking, but that doesn't mean that they're safe. Doesn't mean that they are, exempt from any of these health issues. And so again, what we don't want is people that have never smoked to use these products and be, initiate into smoking. We also don't want patients that maybe would have quit smoking switch to these and continue to smoke. So you can see the next box says research suggests they still contain many of the same harmful ingredients. We do, of course, need additional research on this. And again, these products are not FDA approved and they're not a smoking cessation method for quitting. Remember, like that first quiz question, our last approved smoking cessation medication was Chantix in 2006. Next slide. So you guys answered correctly my question about the nicotine salts in these e-cigarettes. So I wanted to look a little bit further into the liquid and the nicotine components of these products. So the earlier generation e-cigarettes contained what we called a free base nicotine, but our newer products are now using a nicotine salt. So what does that mean? As it says on the slide, the nicotine salt allows higher concentrations of nicotine in the e-liquids and a more effective delivery. The reason it does that is it has to do with lowering the pH of the liquid, so the user can take in more of that without any, or with less irritations. There's still some, obviously, throat irritation. So this is, of course, problematic because we're getting patients getting much higher levels of nicotine than they would get from smoking a traditional cigarette. So again, that's going to be bad for our patients who are trying to quit smoking because we're keeping them addicted. It's also going to be very bad for our patients who never smoked because now not only are we getting them addicted to nicotine, we're getting them addicted at a very high concentration. And then as that last bullet point says, the amount of nicotine found in e-cigarettes is very variable and the labeling is not always accurate. Now I'm going to be speaking in a little bit about some of the changes in regulations and how we are going to see some changes in the labeling of these products. But what's on the market right now, the label does not often match the amount of nicotine. So e-cigarettes are traditionally labeled the cartridges as no nicotine or nicotine-free, and then low, medium, and high levels of nicotine. But what we're finding is that studies have shown that some of the cartridges that say no nicotine really have high levels of nicotine. And the ones that say medium have low, and ones that say no have some, and things like that. So again, when you compare this to an FDA-approved smoking cessation device, such as nicotine replacement therapy, the premise is that we're going to taper down their nicotine over time and eventually get them off of that. If you have patients using these products where the amount of nicotine is highly variable, it's not helping them taper off, but rather it's feeding that addiction cycle and keeping them in using these products. So I'm sure that we have all seen in the news the emergence of vaping-related illnesses. And this has obviously recently been somewhat overshadowed by the coronavirus, but I actually am going to talk a little bit about how they too can be related here. So we call this EVALI. So that stands for e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. So anytime I use the word EVALI, I'm basically talking about a person that has used e-cigarette or vaped, and now they have some lung injury or death. On this slide, it's actually already outdated. It says reported in 49 states with 39 confirmed deaths. That number is now higher. It's 50 states, the District of Columbia, and 2 U.S. territories, so it's everywhere. And the number of deaths, the last statistic that I saw was 53, but again, it's hard to keep up. That number is always climbing. So what is causing the lung injury with these products, or what is, the mechanism behind this EVALI? Most of the current cases have been linked to patients using cartridges that contain THC. So it's not to say that those using non-THC cartridges can't have EVALI, but that has really been the association that has been found so far. And in particular, it's been vitamin E acetate in those cartridges that has been linked to the pulmonary injury. So there's ongoing cases that really suggest the use of e-cigarettes causes injury to the small airways of the lungs. And these are associated with an increased susceptibility of inflammatory lung illnesses such as pneumonia. We've also seen that human cells that are exposed to e-liquids are shown to have a decreased viability. So again, that leads them to an increased risk of bacterial and viral respiratory diseases. So as I mentioned, I wanted to sort of relate this to coronavirus. I was, reading a little bit just this morning, and there have been studies of non-smokers who were exposed to e-cigarette aerosols, and they were found to have a decreased cough sensitivity. So what some of the newer, again, this is very new, obviously, but what some of the hypotheses are right now is that comparing that reduced cough sensitivity with the impairment in the human ciliary function that's been shown in animal studies, that combination, you're not getting some mucociliary clearance. It can really, again, increase pneumonia risk and increase the risk of other bronchospastic types of diseases. So now there have been some hypotheses relating, do smokers and do e-cigarette users in particular have higher risk of coronavirus or other types, again, of broncho diseases. Now, going back to this slide, though, so we're looking again at this vitamin E acetate. It's mostly been seen in cartridges of THC. The CDC does say there can be other ingredients that can be contributing to these recent hospitalizations. But at this point, that's really the one that has the strongest evidence of being the issue. I did want to add that so far there have been no studies linking e-cigarettes to cancer, but a published study in 2019 suggested that mice that were exposed to e-cigarette aerosols did develop lung carcinoma. So my own personal opinion is that it's probably a matter of time before we see these studies in humans as well. Okay, slide. So I gave a very similar presentation in January, and when I gave this presentation, there was an EVALI update that had just been published, and this came out on January 7th. There has not been another full report such as this, which is why I left the slide to say January of 2020. But as I mentioned, these individual numbers are increasing. So these EVALI updates are put out through several organizations, including the CDC, the FDA, and then state and local health departments. And what they do, they're really keeping tabs on the number of these EVALI cases. And as I mentioned previously, now we do see these in all 50 states. DC, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico all have EVALI cases. You can see the number there says 1,979 patients with data available. Again, that number now is higher. It's around 2,500. And of the patients experiencing EVALI, the majority, as you can see, 82%, reported using a THC-containing product. So again, that's really where we're seeing the strongest link. And then what's interesting, if you look at the bottom part of this slide, those patients that had EVALI that were linked to a THC-containing product, where did they get these products? So you can see commercial sources was only 16%. So commercial sources includes recreational dispensaries, medical dispensaries, things like that. But the bulk of the people are getting their products from informal sources, which means family, friends, or dealers, either online or in person. So slide. So why did I point that out, in particular where patients are acquiring these things? So as we all know, and as I've mentioned a few times, we're really concerned about the use of these products in our younger adolescents. So you can see that adolescents ages 13 to 17 are more likely to get products, whether it's THC or just nicotine-containing cartridges, from informal sources. So you can see 94% acquired that from informal sources. So again, that means family, friends, online, things like that. So why, again, am I pointing this out and why am I stressing this? So when we talk about the regulations, how much is that really going to impact what these kids are able to get their hands on? And that's, we'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to those slides. Okay. Go ahead and slide. So this is just really a recap of everything that we've talked about thus far. So the THC containing products from informal sources have detected vitamin E acetate in these products. You can see FDA did testing on 73 Avali patients. 79% had at least one product test positive for THC. And there have been recent studies that found vitamin E acetate in bronchioalveolar lavage fluid in 94% of Avali patients. So again, this is just really re-stressing what we already said, that a lot of this lung injury seems to be linked to that vitamin E acetate. So the ENDS products produce an aerosol. So when I showed you the image of the anatomy of an e-cigarette, we said that there was an atomizer. It was usually a metal coil, and that heated the liquid and turned it into a vapor. Now, if you talk to a proponent of an e-cigarette, they'll say it's just a water vapor, it dissipates, there's no harm in it. But what we're finding is that that is definitely not the case. So the aerosol that comes from these products does contain nicotine, but it also has other particles that are problematic as well. So if you look at that second bullet point, it says aerosol from vaporizers can contain metals from the heating coils. So some heavy metals have been found in studies in this vapor, including cadmium, lead, nickel, tin, copper, etc. And there's reports then that inhaling these metals can cause cardiovascular injury, and it can affect your resting heart rate and blood pressure. Of course, we do need longer-term studies to determine long-term cardiovascular risks. But again, I'm just trying to prove that's not an inert substance. You can also see that leave it on this slide, sorry. We do have other cardiovascular concerns as well beyond what I have listed of this slide. So there is in this aerosol a creation of carbonyl compounds. And this is created when the solvents in e-liquids, which are usually propylene glycol or glycerol, when they are heated, those are also shown to increase the risk of blood clots and atherosclerosis. We also have flavorings in these products. Again, a big source of debate right now, but the flavorings themselves can be harmful to the user. So cinnamon in particular has been shown to cause significant cell death compared to other flavors. There's also some concern that when people mix these flavors or use different combinations, that they can be more toxic to cells than just using one flavor at a time. And that's something that surveys have shown that a lot of adolescents do, is they sort of create their own flavors in these products. And we see them do those not so much with the pods, like the pre-filled cartridges, but when they get from the vape shops and things like that, the larger, like the refillable type of cartridge solution, each solution. Okay, slide now. So I've, pointed out a lot of concern with these products health-wise. So we talked about Avali, which again is the e-cigarette or vaping associated lung injury and deaths. We said that's been reported basically in every state. We talked about the cardiovascular risk, the risk of the flavorings. And then this slide just has some additional risks as well. So there has been an increase in calls to the U.S. Poison Control Center with ingestion of these e-liquids. And again, this is something that we worry about if people have young children in the household or pets or things like that, if they get their hands on these e-liquids and ingest them. And I'll show you in a few slides, and I'm sure most people are familiar with, the variety of flavors that are currently on the market, which of course will be changing, and how they can mimic candy and be very enticing to children. Other health disease states, there was a case report of an 18-year-old who developed hypersensitivity pneumonitis after 3 weeks of vaping. We also worry about what we call popcorn lung or bronchiolitis obliterans, and that is in the bronchioles of the lung, injury and inflammation. So all of these things link to e-cigarettes. So again, just really trying to paint a picture of all of our health concerns. Okay, slide. So not only are we worried about all these health concerns, but we also worry about these things exploding. So, you know, they don't light like a traditional cigarette, but again, most are battery operated, and we've seen the stories or, you know, heard the reports of these things exploding. You know, I've seen very graphic images, which I didn't want to include in today's presentation, but there have been reports of people who were driving using their vape. It exploded, caused them to wreck. You know, these things cannot be because of airline restrictions into checked luggage, which I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. I don't know if I really want them on the plane at all, but again, just pointing out all of the bad and the issues with them. Next slide. So where are we today? The vaping epidemic. So as I've mentioned a few times, we're really seeing an increase in the prevalence of vaping and e-cigarette use in high school and college age students. So e-cigarette companies are going to market their products saying that they're safer. They say that they have less toxic chemicals, harmful chemicals than a traditional cigarette, but hopefully I've pointed out to you that these are not safe products, and there is a lot of harm with their use. Okay, slide. So I've mentioned that we do have, and this is getting into my second learning objective, a lot of changes in regulations. And this is going to be really interesting for the e-cigarette market. So I wanted to talk about that, but we'll start with a question on the next slide. Which of the following statements regarding government regulations of ENDS is true? Is it A, all manufacturers of ENDS must register with the DEA? B, new tobacco products require a pre-market review. C, ENDS products may not be sold to those less than 16 years of age. Or is it D, all of the above? I'll give it a second, let people answer here. Okay, so the majority of people look like they answered C, but we have some answers for D, a couple for B. So this is somewhat a trick question, I'll be honest. So when I wrote this, the correct answer was going to be B. Because of our changing regulations, we do have new products now requiring a pre-market review. However, answer choice C is technically correct as well. With our new regulations, and we're going to talk about this, the regulations are now 21 years of age. So technically 16 falls under that 21 age. So that would be correct. Answer choice A, though, is not correct. So with the new regulations, the ENDS products register with the FDA, not the DEA. So that is why answer choice A is not correct. So we can say B and C are both true answers. Go ahead, slide. So just to give a little bit of background about our regulations to show what has changed and where we are today, on June 22nd of 2009, President Obama signed the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. What this did was it gave the FDA the authority to regulate the manufacture, distribution, and marketing of tobacco products. And then you can see on the slide what was included under this act. So that included cigarettes, e-cigarettes, roll your own tobacco, and smokeless tobacco. So what obviously was missing would be the e-cigarettes, because remember, they really just came to the US around 2007. So go ahead, slide. So in 2016, we had an amendment to that original act. And what it did was it extended the FDA's authority to all tobacco products. So now we see this rule extending to e-cigarettes as well as cigars, hookahs, and dissolvable tobacco products. So you can see now under this new rule that all of these products required health warnings, and it also banned free samples. But because of this new rule, something that's not listed on the slide, manufacturers of newly regulated tobacco products that were not on the market before February 5th of 2007 would have to show that their product met the applicable public health standards that were set by the FDA. And so I point that out because it's really important to note that virtually all of our e-cigarettes were not on the market before that date. So again, e-cigarettes came here in 2007, so they weren't really on the market before February 15th of 2007. So they had not yet gone through this review. So that means that really they should have to go through an FDA review to determine whether or not, they had any public health benefit or, if they should be on the market. So after this amendment, no product can come to market after August of 2016 without a pre-market review authorized by the FDA. Now, obviously, we still have e-cigarettes on the market. So in a couple of slides, I'm going to talk about why that is and what we're going to see changing. So why do we have these new regulations? Why did we have that 2016 amendment? Again, something that we all know and that we're familiar with. We've seen this rate of smoking in adults, but really what I'm focusing on in this slide, in young adults in particular, reach its all-time low in recorded history. So that's great. We have less people smoking, but, slide, we have lots of adults and particularly younger users using e-cigarettes. So the bar graphs on the left look at e-cigarette use among middle and high school students. And again, this is a little bit dated, but you can see that in not too dated, but 2019, almost 30% of high school students using e-cigarettes and 10% of middle schoolers. If you even look before that, we've seen such a big spike in this e-cigarette use between 2011 and 2015. We saw over 900% increase in e-cigarette use among high school students. So this is something, again, that's just continuing to grow. If you look on the right-hand side, we have lower percentages of adults using e-cigarettes. But if you look, again, at those bar graphs, the highest prevalence are going to be in that young adult age range, the 18 to 24. So again, I'm not saying that these people weren't former smokers, but really it leads us to believe these are probably people that were we're going to see some changes with these new guidelines. So after this 2016 amendment, now we're saying that manufacturers of e-cigarettes do need to submit to the FDA to make sure that their product meets applicable public health standards. But they can continue selling their products while they submit their FDA application. Now, when that amendment, that 2016 amendment first came out, there was no timeline on it. It basically just said, if you weren't on the market prior to 2007, you need to submit to the FDA. This past July, a federal judge did put a 10-month deadline on these e-cigarette manufacturers to apply to the FDA. So by May 12th of 2020, they have to submit their product to the FDA. If they do not, the FDA then has the authority to remove it from the market. However, once their packet is submitted to the FDA, it's going to take some time to review this, approximately a year, and they can continue to sell and market their products while it's under review. So let's check on how things have been doing since all of these regulations have gone into place. What has really happened? Slide. So we have retailer and manufacturer checks being conducted. These are under the FDA, and they basically have done inspections of manufacturing facilities as well as those selling the e-cigarettes. So an example here, they did 1,200 vape shop inspections, and these inspections included both like brick and mortar type stores as well as online retailers. And they found one company to be illegally marketing e-liquids. Go ahead and slide. And something else that the FDA is really trying to do is put in place what they call a youth tobacco prevention plan. So go ahead and slide. Oh, I think I missed a slide here, but that's okay. So we're going to talk about why the youth tobacco prevention plan is important, but as I mentioned, these are some of the flavors of these e-juices on the market. Who do you think they're marketing towards? Is this marketing towards an adult smoker trying to quit, or are we marketing towards kids? You can see the flavor there is unicorn cakes. Looks very similar to, I can tell you, my kids told me that is Princess Celestial from My Little Pony. So if you care to know that, this slide. We have, an e-liquid chill that's purple grape. Looks very similar to a purple Fanta grape. That slide. And then the cereal Frankenberry, and then we have Franken Vape. Go ahead, slide. So again, looking at these things that are on the market and who they're really being marketed towards, the FDA has put in place this youth prevention plan. And they have 3 areas that they're trying to target. 1 is preventing youth access to these products. 2 is inhibiting the marketing that's aimed at youth. And then 3 is providing education. So you may have seen some commercials on TV. In 2018, the FDA really expanded their youth prevention plan with a campaign that was called The Real Cost. And it targeted ages 12 to 17. And again, I've seen some commercials on TV, but there's a lot of advertisements with it in social media as well. So I mentioned that the FDA is doing inspections, and they do these compliance checks with regards to sales to youth. So basically, again, both online and brick and mortar, they are not allowed to sell, or they need to card anyone who looks to be under the age of 27. And I know that graphic is a little small, but basically it follows the chart of what happens if that retailer is found to be in violation. So you can see it starts with like a warning letter, then they get some fines, and it kind of grows from there. And you can see between August of 2016, September 2019, they sent over 8,000 warning letters. Now, I'll be honest, if you read this from the FDA or the CDC website, they're very proud of these checks and this prevention program. And I do think it's great that they, are trying to monitor this. But I don't know, in my opinion, it doesn't seem like that many warning letters. And what weight does that fine call? How much of weight does that carry? Like, if they're doing these huge sales of these products, is a $292 fine really going to hurt them that much? So I don't know. This is what's out there, just sort of, an opinion you may have on that. Go ahead and slide. So I keep referring to changes in regulations with regards to the flavorings, and this went into effect January of this year. So I wanted to look more in depth with that. Slide. All right, so fun question here. According to research, which of the following is the most popular e-cigarette flavor among high school students? You think it's cherry, mango, mint, gummy bear, cotton candy, s'mores, or honey? So I didn't include like Frankenberry or grape or any of these. All right, so for time's sake, I will close the poll. I was going to say no one got it right, but someone just did. The correct answer is actually C, mint. Can you believe that? I think that's very surprising. So high schoolers prefer mint flavored e-cigarettes. And then if you cared, second is actually mango. And then third was fruit flavored. Okay, go ahead and slide. So a lot of information on here, but let's look at the timeline of these flavor bans. So back in September of 2019, President Trump announced that he would take strong action against the teen vaping epidemic by banning the sale of most flavored e-cigarettes. So do you think that e-cigarette companies were happy about that announcement? Absolutely not. So they really mobilized and sort of attacked this. So they, groups that represented vape shops from across the country created a campaign that's called We Vape, We Vote. And they had a whole media campaign. They did posters and they ran television ads, which was really interesting, that were targeted in Palm Beach, Florida, where President Trump was vacationing at the time. So they were given a lot of pushback against this initial announcement. What's interesting is the next month, Juul, which again is our largest share of the market with these e-cigs, announced that they would voluntarily suspend sales of most of their flavored products. We'll look more into Juul in a second. In January of 2020, we had this partial flavor ban announced, and it forbids the sale of most flavored e-cigarette cartridges, but there were exemptions to this rule. The exemptions were that they would continue to sell menthol and nicotine flavors and flavored nicotine sold in open tank systems at vape shops. So why is this important to know? So that last question I just asked you, what flavor do most high schoolers prefer? And the answer was mint. Well, now we're banning mint flavors. The American Medical Association has put out a statement that they're very concerned now that these students will start using menthol flavored and again, be a gateway to traditional cigarette smoking. The other thing is you can see that we're not banning the open tank systems. So that means that people can still go to a vape shop and get any flavor nicotine in those.
Left for the second.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Yep, I'll end. Wrap up. So this is a settlement that Juul reached with the Center for Environmental Health. There's a lot on the slide. I'll let you read on your own for time purposes. But basically, this is really sort of a groundbreaking sort of thing because it was the first time that there was a legally binding settlement with Juul. And it put a lot of restrictions with how they can market and sell their products. So you can advance 2 slides if you want. 3 slides, keep going. So another thing that I think is important to note, there is currently no cap on the amount of nicotine that can be in these ENDS products. There was a bill that was proposed that would put a 20 milligram per ml max. It has not gone anywhere. So again, at this time, there is no max concentration. So some brands contain very high amounts, much higher than that. So you can see a 5% Juul pod contains about 59 milligrams per ml of nicotine. And as we know from a traditional cigarette, the user's taking in about 1 to 2 milligrams of nicotine. So again, much higher nicotine concentration in these products. Go ahead, slide. And I wanted to point out that many states have tried state-specific bans, the first being Michigan and Rhode Island as well. As you can see, has state-specific bans, but many, actually all of these have been overturned. And right now we really only have the federal ban in terms of that partial flavoring. Okay, so go ahead and slide. So what can we do as healthcare professionals? Slide. Unfortunately, we don't have guidelines. The last guidelines from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services were from 2008. And so that was when e-cigarettes are new and they really don't address those. Slide. So what we can do, if you want to go ahead and click so the answers to these show up, is we can follow the brief and intensive interventions that are in our guidelines. So the brief interventions, ask a patient if they use tobacco, advise them to quit and refer them to help, or doing the more intensive interventions, asking, advising, and then assessing their willingness to quit, assisting with that quit attempt and arranging follow-up. We can apply these same things to e-cigarettes, but I really wanted to emphasize making sure that you include e-cigarettes in that ask. So when you're doing an intake with a patient or you're asking them, make sure you include e-cigarettes because many don't think of that as smoking. Go ahead, slide. And then lastly, we do have a lot of major retailers discontinuing sales of vaping products, which is great. Slide. And lastly, I wanted to give you some resources available to help patients quit. Honestly, these are just some examples. There's so many more, but these are some of the ones that I tend to use, especially that first one. Really, if you go to any website now or any app that is a smoking cessation app, they tend to have a section on e-cigarettes as well. I really like Become an X because it does have this website where you can track your e-cigarette use and look at your triggers for e-cigarette. But again, just some references that you may be able to implement with your patients. Okay, slide. So just in summary, these are not FDA-approved devices. Hopefully, I've made the case that they are not safe. And we talked about, in particular, the vitamin E acetate causing that EVALI and a lot of the changes in our regulations. So with that, if I have time, I'll answer any questions, or please feel free to contact me afterwards as well.
Certainly. And thank you so much, Jamie. That was, I really enjoyed that talk. So much valuable information. I know, vaping is such a hot topic and such a concern. And, really, I have to say, I was shocked when I saw the dollar amounts that are attached to those fines. It's just, there needs to be a greater focus on that. As you mentioned, I think the highest one was something like $11,000 or $12,000 in comparison to what these companies are making in sales. That's barely a drop in the bucket. So I think greater, even more attention and, individuals such as yourself really helping to educate us and inform, healthcare professionals, and how do we help to support individuals to first not even start vaping, but to provide some counseling to stop if they have started. So I will see if any questions have come in. Do I flip to the next?
Yeah, so I was going to say my contact info is there as well if anyone has any questions afterwards.
So I will, I'll ask this question out loud. What would stop users from including illicit substances like cocaine?
So I'm not sure if the question is asking the user or the manufacturer. At this point, I mean, we talked about the regulations. They're hopefully, as of May of this year, really things on the market are going to be regulated in terms of e-cigarettes and what is in those products. But, it's like with any type of illicit drug use, you can't stop everything. So, I don't know if there is really an answer to that one. The question says, what's the answer to the case study? So that was an open-ended case study. There's not one answer. Hopefully I was helping you to form an opinion through the talk. So as I mentioned, what I usually tell my patients is that, yes, these products are safer than cigarettes, puff for puff, but that doesn't mean that they're safe. So if I teach group smoking cessation classes, and I've had patients come to my class now that use e-cigarettes that want to get off the e-cigarettes. So, there isn't recommendations out there in terms of pharmacotherapy yet as to what we can use. It's a lot of trial and error. And that really ties into because we don't know the amount of nicotine they're taking in from that e-cigarette. So I do a big role in trying to prevent people from starting to use these. But if they are using an e-cigarette, then I really try to work with them, whether it's just counseling or whether it's also pharmacotherapy to get off of the e-cigarettes. Do you want me to go through all of these questions, or how are we on time?
Oh, great. We'll document those, and we'll send them out to you and get the responses back, and then we'll distribute them to attendees.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Jamie. That was really fantastic.
Thank you.